The Ark of the Covenant is one of the most sought after and mysterious artifacts in history. Said to have been built by the Hebrews following the Exodus over 3,000 years ago, and believed to have possessed deadly supernatural powers that could decimate cities, this religious artifact was certainly not one to be reckoned with. But despite all this power and greatness, the Ark completely vanished from the face of the earth around the year 587 BCE, and since then has never been seen again. While the Ark does originate in Hebrew scripture, and has since then become a focal point in numerous religious studies courses, as well as Sunday school sessions, many will probably recognize it most from the 1981 adventure film Raiders of the Lost Ark. In 1981, Jaws director Steven Spielberg and Star Wars creator George Lucas released Raiders of the Lost Ark, which starred Hollywood actor Harrison Ford as everyone's favorite archaeologist, Indiana Jones, in a quest to uncover the fabled Ark of the Covenant before the villainous Nazis do. The film itself proved to be a hit, both critically and financially, and from there spawned numerous sequels, books, and video games, which all tied into the same universe. And even after 40 years, the Indiana Jones series is still going strong, as currently a fifth film is in production and set to release next year in May of 2022. Originally, I had just planned on primarily discussing the Ark's role in the movie versus real life, as the Ark is essentially what the film revolves around, but since the Nazis played such a prominent role in the movie, I decided I needed to include them in this video as well, as there's quite a bit of historical background for them. So, with that said, let's discuss everything Indiana Jones in today's episode of History Beyond the Lens. If you're a newcomer to the channel, History Beyond the Lens is a series dedicated to examining films from a historical perspective and finding ways to connect them to our own reality by asking the question, what is historically accurate about this film I'm watching? While generally, it's just fun to watch and discuss movies, it's also important to keep in mind that movies can teach us just as much about history as any book or internet article can. However, they just teach it differently. If you're still not convinced that films can unknowingly teach us history, then I recommend checking out the first episode of History Beyond the Lens on how Star Wars connects to our own history, and how the actions of the evil empire mirror that of the Nazis from World War II. Honestly, you might just be surprised at how much a science fiction film can connect to our own history, and how it can change your perspective on films forever. I'll make sure to throw the link in the description box below if you're interested. And just before we get into the video, just want to mention one more thing. Please feel free at any point in the video to hit that like button, or even consider subscribing to the channel, as lots of time and effort, as well as numerous rewrites, went into making this episode. Alright, let's get started. Considering there's a lot of information packed into this one video, I'm going to break things down into 3 sections, or chapters if you will, to make things easier to follow. The first chapter is going to be dedicated to briefly going over the history of the Ark, while the second chapter will discuss Nazi archaeology and their fascination with the occult, which played a role in the film as well as real life. Then finally, to tie everything together, the third and final chapter will finish things off by discussing how everything fits into Raiders of the Lost Ark, and if what we see in that film is true to history or not. Chapter 1. A History of the Ark. The Ark of the Covenant has its roots in the Jewish religion and was first mentioned in the book of Exodus and was later expanded upon in the numerous other pieces of Hebrew scripture, such as the book of Joshua, Samuel, and Jeremiah, to name a few. While details are rather scarce on its origin, what is known is that the ark was constructed at least a year following the Exodus out of Egypt, which dates back to about 3,000 years ago. Following its construction, Moses was said to have placed the tablets, in which the Ten Commandments were inscribed upon, within the ark, as well as other religious artifacts, such as a jar of manna, which is what supposedly kept the Israelites fed while they wandered throughout the desert, as well as the rod of Moses' brother, Aaron. As for its appearance, the ark itself is described as being a wooden chest that was covered in a thin layer of gold, with two ornate golden cherubs resting on top. Most likely, these cherubs were envisioned as the ark's protectors, similar to the way the French built gargoyles on top of buildings to fight off evil spirits between the 10th and 15th century. In regard to its size, it's believed to have been approximately 52 inches long by 32 inches wide, with two rings on each side, where two wooden poles would be inserted for use of transportation. Aside from practicality, the wooden poles did serve another purpose as well. According to scripture, it says that if anyone touched or looked within the ark, they would be killed by the wrath of God. This can actually be seen on full display in Raiders of the Lost Ark's finale, as the Nazis make the unfortunate mistake of looking within the ark, and ultimately, they pay the price for it. But more on that later. After the ark was constructed following the Exodus, it's said to have been moved around with the Israelites throughout the desert for 40 years, only for it to be taken to Jerusalem by King David. Following this, the ark was then stored within the Temple of Solomon, and that's where it remained for many years, until the year 587 BCE, when it vanished after the Babylonians attacked Jerusalem. Considering the Babylonians destroyed the Temple of Solomon during their conquest, no one really knows if the ark survived or not. But like any mystical relic in history, there are numerous theories of its possible whereabouts. The leading theory is that the Babylonians could have taken the ark for themselves after the battle, or maybe the Israelites hid the ark days before the attack, as they most likely knew something like this was coming well in advance. Sadly, we may never know. So that's the abridged history of the ark. If you believe I missed anything that you deem as important, please let me know in the comments below. After all, knowledge is power. Chapter 2: Nazi Archaeology during World War II. Early on in the film, when Indiana Jones and his work colleague, Marcus Brody, meet with two federal agents to discuss the Ark, the agents make it abundantly clear that the Nazis have been searching the world for numerous religious artifacts, like the Ark, because Hitler is obsessed with locating potential artifacts that he believes are related to the occult. Turns out, this was actually true in real life, or at least partially true. The Nazis were all around the world in the 1930s and 40s, trying to locate religious artifacts or anything related to the occult. However, the only thing Raiders gets wrong about this scene is Hitler. While Hitler indeed was fascinated with religious artifacts and the occult, he wasn't the main person behind the Nazi archaeology team. Instead, that was Hitler's second in command, Heinrich Himmler, who was not mentioned in Raiders. Heinrich Himmler was Hitler's second in command, and head of both the German state police and the SS. Himmler personally oversaw hunting down all who opposed the Nazi regime, and has also been credited as the one who set up the Jewish concentration camps. Another duty for Himmler was to oversee the Nazi archaeology unit, which was known as the Innenurbi organization. The purpose of this unit was to search for ancient Aryan artifacts to increase German morale and nationalism, since its economy had been in a recession since the First World War. However, like all things Nazi related, the real purpose behind this archaeological unit was for control. Hitler believed that the Germans were the ancestors of a race of people known as the Aryans, or the master race, as he often referred to it as. Hitler's grand idea behind this was to change history altogether and mold it around Germany and his beliefs in general. Even if there was no evidence to suggest his Aryan race theory was true, he'd make it true. The idea behind truth is an interesting concept that has existed throughout history, as it's always been different for everyone. Indiana Jones even makes a point about this in the third film, The Last Crusade, where he says that archaeology is a search for fact, not truth, as he believes truth is more of a term that applies to philosophy. Despite being a major plot point of Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's actually little to no evidence to suggest the Nazis ever searched for the Ark of the Covenant in the first place. But what is interesting to note is that they did search for the fabled city of Atlantis at one point, which both Hitler and Heinrich Himmler believe could have been the birthplace of the Aryans. Fun fact, this was also the plot for the Indiana Jones video game, The Fate of Atlantis, which came out back in 1992. Chapter 3. Conclusion. So, as a whole, how does Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark stack up against the actual history that inspired it? Surprisingly, the answer is quite well, really. Aside from a few minor discrepancies here and there, it can be argued that both the Ark and the Nazis are portrayed rather well within this film. In regards to the Ark, perhaps the biggest discrepancy in the film is its origin. In the film, both Indiana Jones and Marcus Brody tell the two federal agents that the Ark was taken to the ancient Egyptian city of Tanis by a pharaoh named Shishak, but was lost during a sandstorm that lasted a full year, and as a result of that, buried the city. The thing is, both Shishak and Tanis actually existed throughout history, but neither had any connection to the Ark. While Shishak is mentioned in the Bible briefly, there's no record of him taking possession of the Ark. Therefore, it's safe to say that both Shishak and Tanis were only brought into the film to add to the Ark's lore and ensure that the characters end up in Egypt by the film's second act. As for the Ark's powers, the film itself really shines when it comes to showing off these abilities. In the film's finale, we see the Nazis open the Ark, and ultimately pay the price for doing so, as all of them are murdered horrifically. Once the Ark is opened, everything starts to change. Suddenly, a thunderstorm appears out of nowhere, and the Ark lets loose dozens of ghosts who start to fly around the Nazis. While the Nazis are amazed at what they are initially seeing, that feeling of astonishment quickly turns to fear, as the ghosts suddenly turn on them, and then the Ark lets loose a massive array of lightning, which murders all the troopers within seconds. The events which unfolded in this scene are very similar to that of the legendary Battle of Jericho. Legend has it that during the battle, the Israelites marched around the city of Jericho's walls for 6 days, and on the seventh day, the walls suddenly collapsed, and then the Ark let out a show of deadly force through the means of lightning, which were said to be the very wrath of God himself. Raiders of the Lost Ark definitely gets the lightning part right, but as for the inclusion of ghosts that supposedly lived within the Ark, well, that was probably just added for dramatic effect, as there's no reference anywhere to suggest that ghosts live inside the Ark. Now, just to finish off the video, I want to briefly discuss Belloc's outfit in this scene, and talk a little bit about how it relates to history. Throughout 99% of the film, the villain, who is a Nazi archaeologist known as Rene Belloc, can be seen wearing typical 1930s men's clothes. So, really nothing out of the ordinary. However, by the film's end, when the Nazis are performing the ceremony of opening the Ark for the first time, we can see that Belloc is suddenly wearing what looks to be the attire of some sort of priest. Everything from the robes, to the turban, to the chest piece Belloc's wearing, all pay homage to the attire that would have been worn by a Hebrew high priest during biblical times. And considering we're on the topic of Belloc's clothes, let's talk about something else. So, let's take into account what year this film takes place in, that being the year 1936. So, it's right around the eve of the Second World War, which broke out in 1939. Another thing, let's take into account who is present at this very ceremony. That, of course, being the Nazis. And Belloc, who is implied to be Jewish throughout the film, conducts an ancient Hebrew ceremony in front of a group of Nazis, while also wearing ceremonial Hebrew robes. You probably know where I'm going with this, but what's completely ironic about this scene alone is that these are the same group of people that would later go on to commit mass genocide against the Jewish religion only a few years later during World War II. So just give that some thought the next time you decide to watch the movie. Alright, that just about does it for this video. As usual, thank you so much for sticking around and giving this a watch. I understand that the overall finished product was quite lengthy in some areas and rather complex in others. So, if anything is unclear, please don't hesitate to drop a comment down below and ask whatever question may be on your mind. And with all that said and done, if you have not already, feel free to give this video a thumbs up and possibly consider subscribing to the channel too, as every little bit counts and it's greatly appreciated in the end. On behalf of the CBU Historical Society, my name is Avery, and I'll see you next time.